This podcast, it's a Costard and Touchstone production. Hi, I'm Alan Katz. This is The Donor, a modern horror story. Episode 5, Diblings. Our story up till now. My old friend Hal, an anonymous sperm donor in the mid-1980s while working his way through medical school, lost his shield of anonymity when he became a customer of personal genomics company 23andMe in the mid-20-teens 25 years later. But Hal's surprise at being found by his donor kids was nothing compared to his donor kids' surprise at finding out that Hal was their actual biological father. Almost none of them had signed on to 23andMe knowing they were the product of a sperm donation. Hal's relationship with Miles, the first donor kid to reach out to him, flared to life, then dimmed considerably. His relationship with Beka also flared to life, but it then burned brightly before it started to literally burn, as in burn down the house. During a day-long bike ride, Hal triggered Beka by innocently using the word attractive in a message to her. She then put genetic sexual attraction on the table. That, she suggested, was what Hal was feeling toward her. Hal, once he understood what it was and got his mind around it, couldn't disagree. Caught in GSA's tractor beam, Hal acknowledged his feelings and thought he sensed the same feelings in Beka. But Hal's eloquent letter to discuss it together got a missile-like missive in response. Discuss it? No. Discussed it? Yes. Beka ended their relationship and cut off Hal completely.
It was devastating. It was obviously the end. She fixed it. I have a million thoughts all at the same time, so let me just try and tease each thought apart. Obviously, there's the overwhelming sadness of the ending of this relationship. Again, I was in a bad marriage. Thankfully, I did have someone who was supporting me emotionally. That was that young lady who I met in the bookstore.
In our previous episode, Hal mentioned that he'd been having an affair while all this was happening. He'd met a woman, 25 years younger than he was, in the Game of Thrones section of the aforementioned bookstore. Next thing you know, they're across the street having sushi.
We both needed each other. She was going through a lot, and I was going through a lot, and it just fell together. And you hear those stories, you read about those stories. This was one of those stories. It was very happy, and we're still friends after all these years. With Beka, it was a almost daily conversations, fun conversations. We were laughing. We were talking about so many things going on in the world. She was worried about the future, as a lot of us are, climate change and politics.
Did you regret sending your letter?
Well, after I read hers, I certainly did. I regretted it very, very much. I didn't think I had written anything that deserved that kind of reaction. I thought I was just being honest, and I was trying to be respectful. I didn't want to hurt her feelings in any way. I didn't want to shine the spotlight on her, blame her. I thought the worst case would be that we'd have a conversation about it. Hal, why do you think this way? Where did this come from?
Did you feel in any way that she was right?
Yeah. I went through a lot of self-searching after I got her letter, because no one had ever accused me of some of the things she'd accused me of. I could never imagine myself, forcing myself onto someone or being in a place where I wasn't wanted. And, was this really how I was coming off? I had some close friends that I talked to this about. Some of them would say, Hal, you needed to be the adult in the room, and you weren't. And I still believe that to this day, that, yeah, I was wrong in that regard.
Is it easy to say that, not just in hindsight, but not being in the clutch of those emotions?
Well, that's the whole thing. I was in the clutch of those emotions. So that's what GSA is about. You get in this tractor beam. You don't understand it. You don't realize how powerful it can be. What really hurt was the battering that she took to my persona. I've always tried to be kind, generous, thoughtful, always trying to consider what other people might be thinking, never wanting to insult, place people in a difficult position, compassionate. That's always been my watchword, has been compassionate. Just to have all of that ripped up and thrown back into my face and just...
You took her words.
Totally.
You became depressed?
I'm a really happy-go-lucky person most of the time. So I think the word depressed is too strong. I was heartbroken. I think that's a better word. But on the other hand, I had never met this woman. It's not like we had this loving relationship. So getting over the heartbreak wasn't too bad. But for a few weeks there, it was a very dark place. I couldn't believe I was capable of angering someone like that, particularly someone I cared about.
And so, with nothing much to lose, Hal wrote Beka one more letter.
I wrote her what I thought was an incredibly heartfelt, humble apology letter. Remember, she had said in her letter that she had blocked me. And I thought, well, if she blocked me, she won't see the letter. She didn't block me. Question is why? And then, of course, she'll actually see this apology letter. Honestly, I didn't expect her to respond, particularly after the letter she had written me, but I didn't want to leave things the way she had left them, as if I was some sort of monster. I wanted to leave things in a peaceful, I get it kind of thing. There was nothing in my apology letter that suggested we have another conversation or get back together, or whatever. I wanted to correct the record.
Hal figured, his message now sent, that would be the last he'd ever hear of or from Beka. And indeed, for a while, he didn't hear anything from Beka or from any of his other donor kids. All the same, Hal had a feeling he wasn't nearly done with them yet.
I had a feeling that others would eventually show up. There were just too many out there and not enough had shown up yet. It wasn't like I was, again, checking the website. I can't recall how many months went by, but finally, after 6 months, 7 months, something like that, presto, a young man showed up. And 2 days later, a young woman showed up.
Meet Jerry and his dibling, Janice. Sticking to his guns, Hal resolved not to reach out first. His donor kids would have to do that.
Jerry didn't spend much time waiting to reach out. He wrote an introductory letter that was nice. It wasn't the kind of letter that Beka had written, but it was to the point and it was well written.
He didn't get all those genes.
Well, he got some good genes because he has a genius IQ, as it turns out. His parents had not told him either. He was very surprised at learning the news. And then he basically said, "Who are you?"
He wasn't so much asking, "Who are you?" He was asking, "Who am I?"
Yeah, exactly. We exchanged a series of very friendly letters to each other. Jerry lives on the East Coast, and his older brother lives on the West Coast. There is a 3-hour time difference between them, which is important to this story. And I'm reporting this story the way that Jerry told me the story, because it's kind of cute. And Jerry has a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. Apparently diabetes or, some hypertension, heart disease, whatever it is, something runs in his family. And he and his older brother were both concerned about this. And so his older brother got onto 23andMe to see the health genes, to see if he had gotten whatever bad gene was floating around in the family. Now, the older brother did not know that he was the product of a sperm donation either. So the older brother does this 23andMe, gets his results back, and never looks at the family tree. All he looks at is the health genes. And he sees that he does not have the family bad gene. And he's all excited. He's missed the headline. So he tells his little brother, he says, "Hey, you got to do 23andMe because I don't have the bad family gene and maybe you don't either. So you should do this." Jerry says, "Yeah, of course." So Jerry does it. Jerry's telling me the story, how he gets up to go to work at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing he does at 6 o'clock in the morning is check his emails. His results are in, right? He immediately checks to go to the family tree. Now, at this point, things have changed since I was on the site. He goes to the family tree and up comes a warning page, apparently. And the warning page says, by clicking on this button, you may discover secrets or you may discover information that is emotionally traumatic or whatever. I've never seen the warning page, but after it has all its disclaimers, it says, are you sure you wish to proceed? Check here. So Jerry says, well, now, yeah, check here. So he checks the box and up comes another warning page. Are you sure you're sure? And he goes, well, at this point, like, how am I going to turn back now? It's like, yeah, of course, checks the box and up comes a third warning page. Are you sure you're sure? Fully committed at this point. And, he checks the box and the first thing he sees that he is 50% Ashkenazi Jew and his family's not Jewish. He starts freaking out and he looks and pretty soon he discovers my name as his biological father. First thing he does is he calls his older brother on the West Coast. Now, it's a 3-hour time difference, 3 a.m. in Seattle or San Diego or wherever the heck. The older brother's probably sound asleep, and all he gets is his brother's answering phone. And he leaves a message that goes like this. This is an emergency. Like it's a really important emergency. Not a life-threatening emergency, but an emergency nevertheless. Call me as soon as you get this message. And then apparently, he calls his mom at 6:15 in the morning. Mother says, Jerry, what's wrong? It's awfully early in the morning. Is everything okay? And Jerry says to his mom, Mom, did you forget to tell me something along the way? She goes, what do you mean? What do you mean, son? And he says, well, like maybe who my father might be. And she says, oh, why don't you come over for dinner tonight and your father and I will have a little conversation. And so that's how Jerry explained to me his intro, his trip through the door, so to speak. And we had a pleasant back and forth for about 3 letters or so. Nothing earth-shattering, brought him up to speed on my family's health situation. And in that last letter to him, I said, you should know that your sister and I are estranged, and if you'd like to know why, ask her. I kind of wanted to diffuse the situation a little bit. I thought maybe I'd learn some more if he ever told me anything more about it. But honestly, I just wanted him to make sure he understood that this wasn't a happy family.
You had experienced a dysfunctional family growing up.
My parents had divorced, yeah. Beka and I had a wonderful relationship for some weeks, and it really felt good. Whatever it was, it felt really good. And most of the time, a huge percentage of the time, it really felt like a father-daughter relationship. So here's this next sibling, Jerry. I was hoping that by inviting him to ask her what happened, maybe I would get the same invitation from her. That was really stupid, but I'd never gone through anything like this before, and I thought it would be fair.
What happened as a result of go ask Beka?
Jerry went silent. I didn't hear from him for over a month. Might have been 6 weeks, something like that. I was really shocked that I didn't hear from Jerry at all. It was very upsetting too, because at this point, now I'm really wondering, what in the hell is Beka telling him?
What Hal was now encountering was the Dibling experience. If there's a silver lining to this story, it seems to be discovering that you have half-siblings you never knew existed. Donor siblings have a wide range of relationships with each other. Theirs really is a new kind of sibling relationship, born, as it were, outside of any normal family dynamic. And it hinges on the fact that the thing that connects them all is a common stranger, a man none of them knew or grew up with. And yet, everything about this stranger, from what he looks like to what makes him laugh to what health issues await him, that's what they all have in common. Imagine meeting someone who reminds you of you.
We've been really lucky that all of us, when we have found each other, have within a short period of time welcomed it and have become close.
Jeanette, not her real name, is, like Hal, a radiologist. She was 12 when she learned during her parents' divorce that she wasn't her dad's biological child. She was 54 when, as a customer of 23andMe, she went looking for her bio-father because of health questions. Having been raised an only child, the last thing she expected to find was family. But there they were, 10 total half-siblings in all, 8 Diblings and 2 donor-raised siblings. The Diblings' bio-dad was happy to provide his medical details, but nothing else, and he opposed the Diblings reaching out to his 2 daughters regardless of the fact that they, too, were siblings to the Diblings. The Diblings themselves had their own ideas. Whereas Hal made himself available to his donor kids, Jeanette's donor dad didn't. Being discovered like this was the last thing he'd ever expected. But as the Diblings surmised, either he'd been incredibly prolific throughout his entire medical school career and into his practice, or his frozen sperm had. He produced donor kids on either side of and between the 2 daughters he raised. As a group, the Diblings were torn about their bio-dad.
Because we really did want to respect him and his wishes. At the same time, our thoughts and feelings on many occasions were, gosh, we had no choice in this. His kids had no choice in this. Nobody in this whole world had any choice about who was going to be our father besides him. Even our parents didn't get to pick. They were just assigned, He was the only one. And then so we thought, gosh, it's not our secret to keep. But then at other times we thought, of course, we want to keep his secret. He didn't have any idea. This was a nice thing he did. He didn't do it out of any... There's no right answer. There's no right answer.
Another donor-conceived person I spoke with, Donna Hall, who's allowing us to use her real name, also learned early that her biological father was a sperm donor. She and 2 Diblings she found on 23andMe went looking for their donor together and found him.
We were looking up all of the doctors that were in the clinic, going on Facebook and looking for their pictures. Could this be our dad? We were calling clinics, calling offices. It was quite the interesting search. We call ourselves the Dibs, donor siblings, and then also the Jeffersons because we were all conceived at Jefferson University. We have a little Facebook family page. And when we did eventually find who our donor is, I resemble him and his sister I could be his sister's daughter.
Back to Jeanette. In the end, she and her Diblings did reach out to their donor-raised siblings. One of them didn't want to communicate with them behind their father's back, but the other sibling did, and she still maintains a relationship with her Diblings, behind her father's back. The point of this is, Diblings bond much as siblings do, but with a twist. They were all part of a secret, information that no one was supposed to know. From a donor parent like Hal's point of view, it's a whole other kind of minefield. Donna Hall.
One of the things about all of us is we are all extremely respectful of everyone's privacy. We are respectful of the wishes of our donor father, while some might be a little more angry because they don't feel like he gets a right to tell us what we can and can't do. I personally, and all of us have been very respectful of everybody else's choices. So we would never do anything that we all didn't agree upon.
Jeanette, our radiologist.
To me, it is an incredible positive in my life. I love them all. It has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I mean, having my children and this. The more love and the more connections to me, the better.
While We Are Family was how the Diblings saw it in Hal's donor family too, the song in Hal's head was Where is the Love?
I don't hear from Janice at all, but I'm curious about her, of course. And so I get onto Facebook and try to see who in the heck she is. What's her deal? Where is she? What is she doing? I was incredibly curious. Janice sent me at some point, she did send me a request to see my DNA. Essentially, she wanted to see my health report. And to do that, I have to consent to sharing it. There was no note with it, really. It was just this, would you mind sharing your DNA? And I used that as an opportunity to say hello. So I responded, yes, here's my DNA. By the way, hi, I hope you're doing well. She responded, I think at some point, and she just said, I have a lot to say, or maybe nothing to say, and I'll get back to you. The first thing you can't help but notice, she's stunning. I mean, she's a beautiful young woman. And she's very well educated. She's cool. She's just really cool. I was very, very impressed with the things she had posted on Facebook. Of course, that just made me more disappointed that I was not going to be a part of the conversation. Here's a wonderful person that I should be in touch with, who I'm not. And apparently after Beka had gotten her hands on Jerry, I wasn't going to hear anything from Janice. I figured that was just going to be the way it is.
So now you feel like you're going to watch potentially a family tree fill up with people who won't talk to you.
Yeah, exactly. It was a terrible feeling. And I thought, it's not for me to interrupt this, that they're here, they have their own lives to deal with. They've got this new information about who their DNA father is, that I really should just let it go. As difficult as that felt to me, because I wanted to be part of their lives in some way. And now I was being excluded, and the way I was being excluded just felt so unfair. People were only getting one side of a story. I think it was like 4 to 6 weeks later, I finally heard from Jerry. And he wrote me this letter from the heart that was very painful to read. It was obvious he had bought hook, line, and sinker everything that Beka had told him. He was very upset with me. He felt like, because he was the oldest, that he had to protect his sisters from me, as if I was some sort of fucking monster. That was just heart-rending.
As much as I would love to quote directly from Jerry's letters, they don't exist anymore. When Hal divorced his wife, the divorce created nightmares all its own, having to do with the fact that Hal maintained these relationships with his donor kids in secret. There was nothing illegal or immoral in it, but Hal feared what his about-to-be ex-wife's divorce lawyer would do with it. And this divorce already was expensive in multiple ways. But back to Jerry.
What was interesting is he said something in that letter that stuck with me, in the same way that some of the things that Beka had said had stuck with me. And one of the things he wrote in that letter was, I don't want to become like you. That was like, let's take an arrow, pull back on that bowstring as far as we can. Let's aim for your heart and just from 3 feet away and just let it go. It was really, really painful. He ended it by saying, this is not necessarily goodbye, but merely farewell for now. Maybe someday in the future, we'll chat again. I read this letter and I thought, well, I wonder if things can get any worse. As bad as things had been after the Beka letter, now things are even worse. Now everything's been poisoned to shit. Is there any way to recover from this? I let it sink in for a few days. And then I wrote him back. And he had said in his letter that he and Miles and Beka and Janice had become a very tight foursome, that they were in constant communication. They'd become good friends. And they were loving these new relationships that they had with these siblings. I thought, you know what, let me start there and build on that. And so when I wrote him back, I said, it's fantastic that the 4 of you have each other. And that honestly, and I meant this when I wrote it, and I still do to this day, the most important thing is that you guys have each other, because you didn't have these bloodline siblings in your lives. Only Jerry had an older brother. Miles had a sibling as well, but now for the first time, there are these 4 people. They have their new siblings, and they're all intelligent, accomplished people. They're good people. Going back to that old Star Trek prime directive, I used those words. I said, that's really the prime directive here, is that the four of you maintain this relationship. Because the truth is that I'll be gone long before you guys are gone. Regardless of whatever happens from this point on, that's the most important thing. It's the four of you have each other. That was the first part. And I didn't send the second part till the following day because I wanted that to sit by itself as an isolated thought. The second day, though, I said, I don't know what your sister Beka told you about me, but what you've heard is one side of a story. And I can assure you there's another side. And one of the lessons I've learned in life is that until you've heard both sides of a story, you haven't heard the story. As I see it, there's a fence between us. You're on that side of the other side of the fence. And it's totally up to you if you want to kill our communications and stay on that side of the fence. Or do you want to look over that wall and see what in the hell is on the other side of that wall? Because unless you do that, you'll never know. I don't know how long I'll be here. I have no idea if you might need a kidney transplant or a marrow transfusion. And if you want to kill a relationship because you've only heard one side of a story, that's your prerogative. But I'm here and I understand where you're coming from. And if you'd like to talk about it, let me know. But it wasn't too long. He wrote back and he said, you're right. Why don't we meet? It took some months. We're both very, very busy people. I had learned at this point not to pursue like I had before. It was let them do their thing. And so weeks would go by, a couple of months, I wouldn't hear from them. And I thought, well, I guess, that's that. And maybe I'd write, hey, just hoping you're okay. Yeah, I'd write something to break the ice. And he'd write back and say, hey, I'm doing fine, just been really busy. And it turns out he suffers from some depression. And when he told me that, suddenly it all became clear to me that it might be some time between communications for him.
But in fits and starts, Hal and Jerry kept at it, and their plan to meet in person actually took shape. For Hal, this was a lifeline away from monsterdom. As the pandemic taught us all, meeting people virtually is good because it's convenient. But as human interaction goes, it sucks. We communicate so much more in person, non-verbally, body language, facial expressions, even our breathing. And these are all while we're not talking, while the camera is in essence looking away from us. Hal needed every bit of communication available to him if just to wrestle back a little bit of his story from Beka.
So I meet with Jerry. It's a rainy night at this pub in a little town, somewhere between us. I think I said, hi, son, or something like that, or I don't know, hi, dad, hi, son. We sit down in a booth, and we put each other at ease very quickly. I think he bore some resemblance to me. So we're sitting there and we're ordering our pub food, French fries and whatever, and chicken sandwiches, and we're talking, and I don't know how long we were there, but the waitress, she notices that we've been there for a long time. We've been, talking. And I turned to her and I said, you might be wondering what's going on here, why we're still eating your food after an hour and a half. And I said, it's because I was a donor and this is my biological son. The waitress was stunned. She couldn't believe what she had wandered into. Yeah, it was very, very intense for he and I. As it turns out, though, he had already met 2 or maybe all 3 of his siblings before he met me. But still, here was the monster sitting across the table from him. I think that his initial impression that he came with was a lot different than the impression that he left with. He told me that the others, of course, were very upset with me, that it would be unlikely for me to ever hear from them again. Unless, and he added, unless there was some sort of emergency, as if, like, if I'm on a deathbed and I want to see them, they'd probably come see me or something. I'm not sure. But what I found so fascinating, when I showed him the picture of the holy shit, I love you, he looked at me very nonchalantly and said, yeah, when I met her and she got off the plane, she was wearing that shirt. I thought about that for a minute or two or three. I thought to myself, is she that conniving that she would wear that shirt knowing I had this picture?
Can I confess? I'm with Jerry here. Beka's really smart, but she isn't Lex Luthor. It's entirely possible that what Beka saw was how good she looked in the shirt and nothing more.
I'll never know why she wore that shirt when she met her brother. I think he was being nice when he said, yeah, I understand. But I think more importantly, I think he realized that the person he was talking with didn't match with the description that he had been given by his sister. And I think that was probably more important than any specific thing I might have said. I left him this beautiful gift. When I went to make my first donation, and I was waiting in the doctor's office to do it, I had my OBGYN textbook with me. It was a little yellow book. And I opened the front of the book up and I sketched a mushroom cloud. And under the bottom of the mushroom cloud, I wrote, "Why be normal?" And because that's kind of how I felt sitting in the office, getting ready to do what I was going to do. And it turns out when Jerry told me his birthday and whatever, it's likely that was the day I sat in his office that he was conceived, because 9 months later was his birthday. So I gave him this book and I gave him an envelope. In the envelope was a letter that was, again, really heartfelt. And I explained to him that, enjoying history as I had, that the day of his conception was probably 11/11, November 11th. That's a very special day in history, because on the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month, World War I came to an end. It's Armistice Day. And I said, imagine these warring enemies having bombed each other, gassed each other, machine gunned each other, had gone through the most horrible things. And yet, on this day, they were able to sit around and come up with some sort of armistice and move forward. And I said, to me, it feels a little bit like this after what I've been through. And I want to thank you for meeting me. Also in the envelope was a check for $11,011.11. I knew he needed a new car, so I thought I'd help him out with that. And I also wrote at the bottom of the letter a quote. I love great quotes. And there was a quote from Kennedy that went something like, "Any problem made by man can be solved by man." And I told him that. I said, whatever differences are present, these are all man-made, and there's really no reason that we can't repair these things. Like I said, we chatted for probably, I don't know, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. By the time we left, it was all wonderful, positive feelings. It was 100% awesome experience.
You hugged goodbye?
I think we did. I imagine that we did. I can't imagine that we didn't. I heard from him the next day where he thanked me for everything, said, "Hey, I'm here anytime you want to talk. Give me a call, write me, whatever. The door's open." It has stayed open. He has since gotten married. He's got 2 kids. He's moving on with his life, very well employed, lives in a beautiful house. He's married to a very successful family. Life is good. We've met now 3 times, I think, for dinners. There's no ill will. He's put a door between the relationship he has with me and the relationship he has with the siblings. What's interesting is that when he met Beka, told him that she didn't mind that he had a relationship with me. It wouldn't bother her. Whether he needed that blessing or not, I don't know.
Something in Hal just wouldn't quit. Like Don Quixote tilting at a windmill, Hal weaponed up, albeit with his pen, and went full mea culpa in a letter to Janice. His hope, of course, was that Janice would deliver the mea culpa to her Dibling Beka, and Beka, our metaphorical windmill, would stop blocking it. Hal was trying to use the Dibling dynamic to his own advantage.
Dear Janice, if life, your life, is a great stage or play, then I am not a player, but merely the doorman. Mortality is a distressing thing. And each night when we pitch our tents a little closer to the final campground, I think about it a little bit more. It's an uncomfortable thought, as you might imagine. And yet, I have so much to be thankful for, Janice, far more than most others. Even more so with each passing semester, it seems, with at least 5 more of my progeny somewhere out there. And among those wonderful contributions that I'll be leaving behind will be you and Beka and Miles and Jerry and even Sonny. But as I contemplated this daunting situation, it occurred to me to write my heart out and allow you to meet me completely disarmed, vulnerable, introspective, and genuine. I know there's a terrible, horrible shadow hanging over me, well-deserved, sadly, and that's why I'm writing you. Ordinarily, I would leave it to you, my extraordinary offspring, to make first contact. But as I thought about my life and yours, I realized that if I wanted to leave you something in my own words, something from my own heart that can't be filtered, I would have to initiate it. So here it is. My stupidity and frailness, my shameful behavior of last July is an indelible part of my personal history, branded upon my forehead, regardless how much she told you. It's possible you'll read some uncomfortable things here. One thing I've learned about myself after all these years, I've done stupid and hurtful things. I make mistakes. I don't expect you to cut me slack, forgive me, or assuage my personal pain. I'm here to tell you about me. And when I'm all done, I'll know that you'll have an idea of who I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and where you came from. And that's the whole idea, right? So let's get it out there. The same wonderful qualities that you find so endearing in your sister overwhelmed me too. And the disastrous outcome with Beka is unquestionably one of the worst, idiotic, deplorable screw-ups of my life. It is a tragedy of my own making that this letter has to be what it is, but I don't wish to leave you with the inaccurate belief that I am a complete fuck-up. There are a few things that many find decent and welcoming in me, maybe even admirable. I am charitable and generous, and I'm constantly fighting the battle to preserve this planet for you and your generation. I don't eat red meat, I drive hybrids, I have nothing to do with guns, and I love animals. My housekeeper is undocumented, and we keep a bedroom for her in case she needs to hide from the INS agents who have begun raiding her trailer park at home every now and then. I live in a paradise. I'm blessed and thankful to be here. My dad, your grandfather, who passed of bladder cancer at age 86, was so proud of me, but he'd be horrified at my actions last summer. Admittedly, this is such an incredibly difficult, unusual, and terrible situation for me. I'm in such stormy and uncharted waters in so many ways, and I have no idea what to write to you or any of the others. It's akin to skiing fresh tracks in a huge snowstorm. There's an incredible opportunity to have an awesome time, and I know in general which direction to point my skis, but pretty scared of hitting a tree. I must say, at this point, I feel like one of those ice-encrusted Everest climbers, frozen in place for eternity. The thing about every hike and climb is that when they succeed, it's done one step at a time. I'm aware this one is clumsy and sad and requires a leap across a difficult abyss just to get to the trailhead. I won't blame you one bit for passing on this one, but I think we can also agree that when we climbers and hikers summit a mountain, the rewards can be surprising and immeasurable, and the view astounding. That's why we try. Dear Janice, you have a father, and from where I am at the back of the playhouse, I give both him and you a standing ovation at this early intermission for raising someone who seems to be rather amazing. Warmly, the doorman.
And so Hal sends this letter. The result?
I didn't hear from her for a year. And then I'm at my mom's visiting her and checking my emails on my phone. And out of the blue, there's an email. Hal, I'm sorry that I haven't responded or talked to you, but now's the time. She said, I'm in a hospital and they've diagnosed me with a stroke. She gave me some specific symptoms that she was having neurologically. She was afraid. She was wondering if I'd be kind enough to review her CT and MRI exams. I can relive this moment forever. I read this quietly and I look up at my mom, and I had told my mom a little bit about what had happened with these kids. And I said, hey, Mom, one of the DNA daughters just contacted me, wants me to look at her films, but I'm a little wary. I know that she's really tight with Beka, and I don't know if this is something I should really get involved with. Like, will she sue me? Well, what's the upside? What's the downside risk here of getting involved in her medical treatment? And my mom looked at me and she said, son, you're a doctor. This is what you're supposed to do. All right, Mom. Yes, ma'am. I wrote her back and I said, it's great to hear from you. I'm sorry, I hear from you under these circumstances. Here's my address. Send me your DVDs. I'll take a look and let you know. I also asked her, I said, tell me more about these neurological symptoms you've been having. By the way, are there any drugs that you're taking, either illicit or legal or whatever? And she said, well, I actually suffer from depression. And I'm taking a couple of medications for that. And she told me what those were. And I looked at her films, and she did not have a stroke. She had been misdiagnosed. She had a normal variant called a Merkel-Robin space. It's just a normal variation. It's a little puddle of fluid in your brain. It's tiny. And you can often see a little tiny blood vessel that runs through it. And that's how you know that's what it is. And it's not a stroke, because a stroke can look similar. So I wrote her back and said, hey, you're fine. But given the symptoms that you're telling me about, I think they're related to your drugs. And I wonder if you cut back on your drugs, maybe the symptoms would go away. And so I think she had a discussion with her physician who had written these drugs for her, and they cut the doses down and her symptoms went away. So I had made a wonderful introduction into her life.
And just like that, the door to Janice opened. Hal plunged right on through it, not realizing that the shadow of Beka still loomed over everything. But it wasn't just Beka's shadow looming over Hal and all her Diblings. It was Beka's rage. On the next episode of The Donor, a modern horror story, even as Hal's relationship with Janice flowers as it's about to, Beka's rage will touch everything. Hal's problem? He didn't know yet that was his problem. See you next time. The Donor, a modern horror story, is a Costard and Touchstone production.